like I really needed a microphone anyway. Any item which is not on the agenda, if anyone would like to come up and address the commission, you're welcome to do so at this time. Negative. Any requests for continuance, withdrawals, postponements, reordering of agenda items, or addition of agenda items? Is that at the point that we bring this up? Okay. The Tech Consulting has requested a continuance for Planning Commission meeting tonight for the Verizon Tower, which was our first item on the agenda. And they asked for, they did not give a date, but from what I understand from the city attorney, we need to reschedule this for December meeting. So at this point, do we need to get a motion to move that?
I would prefer to have a motion.
Okay, would somebody please make a motion to move the agenda item for tonight, public hearing on the new development and city projects for the request for SAC Wireless, to move this event, or I'm sorry, to move this item to the December meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, so Tech Consulting will hopefully be here on December. I don't know the exact date for that item. And at this time, would anybody like to approve, or are there any changes in the minutes from the previous meeting in October?
Move approval.
Second.
In favor say aye.
Aye.
All right, at this point, we will hear the items on the agenda this evening. So we're skipping the first one, which was the wireless, and we're going straight to the permitted use in the tourist-related commercial district, TRC. And are we making a presentation on this?
Yes, sir.
Holly?
Good
please.
evening.
Thank
Holly
you.
Owen, Planning Director, City of Solvang. This has been a bit of a research project for staff, for myself personally. This was driven by a couple of applications that we received over the last couple of months that gave us pause, partly because they came in for business certificates, and we realized that according to the zoning ordinance, they really fell into sort of an all-other category, and in fact, we weren't entirely sure that we could approve their use. But as we looked more deeply into some of the uses that are currently existing and approved in the tourist-related commercial zoning district, we realized that they had that there were some that were grandfathered in, and that there had been some cases made that allowed these uses to come in previously. So that opened up an opportunity to take a look at what we already have, and to welcome some suggestions from Planning Commission as to where we may go with this in the future, and if any changes need to be made at this time. I did put a map up on the board there for the audience benefit, but also just for all of ours, to remind ourselves of the rather large area that we designated in our wisdom years back as the tourist-related commercial area. I think we're all pretty familiar with some of the main streets and some of the side streets and some of the uses, but I think we also find that we have parking lots in there, we have single-family residential in there, we have my office is in there, we have civic buildings in there. So we have quite a variety of uses that all fall under this tourist-related commercial designation. We also want to make sure that we encourage certain uses because, again, this is a tourist-driven economy, and so really what that led me to think about is what do people come here for? What do they do when they get here? And are we talking about a couple of areas in particular? Are we talking about this entire pink area? And the reality is, I think we have seen it ourselves. There's an awful lot of pedestrian traffic. And that is a reflection of our local economy. Our economy generates a great deal of revenue from TOT. That means people, heads in beds, people are sleeping, and then they get up and they look for things to do. So, not entirely, of course. Some of them go out of town, day trips and whatever. But for a lot of the immediate downtown area, this is what people do. They walk around, they eat, They maybe come for special festivals. They do some wine tasting, and so I think we're all very aware of the incredible amount of foot traffic that we have on a daily basis in this town, and that is partly what the zoning ordinance reflects in terms of the permitted uses in that area. So,
Can I move this so we can see
Oh,
the
sure, sure.
slides? You guys don't mind?
yeah, you can. Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I was trying to get a big pink map up there, and now you can see. I can also provide a copy of the PowerPoint afterwards too, if that's of interest to anybody. Yeah, thank you. So, what are some of the allowed uses? And when I looked at all the list of allowed uses in the zoning ordinance, there was a fair number in the tourist-related commercial area. I picked out the ones, first of all, here that seem to dovetail with that pedestrian focus and that pedestrian experience. We allow amusement enterprises indoors, retail stores, theaters. There's a Solvang theater right over here. And I think they meant theaters of a different nature, too, in case there was a cinema that perhaps would want to come into the downtown area. Nursery, which is sort of a quaint nod to the past, probably. But, you know, it is allowed in the TRC. Parking lots. And then there's some other allowed uses. When you look at this list, this tends to, I think, reflect visitor uses primarily, not entirely. But then there's other allowed uses for the likes of you and me, people who live here and need services and want to have that still as part of the mix of the downtown core business offerings. So you're talking about repair and service uses, beauty parlors, although they don't call them that these days anymore, barber shops, yes, spas. And there are in fact, I think I left that one off. There was health clubs and spas are also allowed uses. So what you have here is a mix of uses, some of which tend to serve the local population more than they might serve a tourist population. But all in all, I would say a good, a healthy mix of what's allowed. Now, well, the last line, professional, administrative, and general business offices, is really kind of a catch-all. And one of the challenges that we've had as staff is how to interpret what a professional office is. There's no definition in the zoning ordinance for professional office. There's none for administrative office, and there's none even for general business office. So although a flexibility within a zoning ordinance is sometimes a good thing, it allows some stretch in the definition of what might be allowed. The irregularity of application makes for a frustrating determination on the part of not only planning directors as they look back in the past. You know, if there isn't a great staff report that ties a particular use to a professional office use that's permitted, or some sort of documented evidence, then it's a little difficult to keep making determinations in a consistent way, which is really what we're always looking for, not only for us, but for the general public, for property owners and for businesses too. One challenge that we had with some of these recent applicants was that they called themselves therapists. They were therapists of some variety of nature. Some of them were nutritional supplement therapists. Some wanted to use special devices. Some it was a combination of talk therapy and a certain kind of practice. They made it pretty clear that they were not massage therapists. So as we know, and as you probably remember, most of you, there's a big ordinance that goes with that use, and a very particular way in which that can be allowed in town, where it can be allowed. And so we're not confusing that use, at least not in this case, with what's been proposed to us as businesses to come in. it was clear to us that there were other marriage and family counselor businesses and other dentists that were in the TRC that fell under medical office definition. It did not necessarily fall under the TRC unless you want to call it a professional office. So that definition is pretty wide. Do you call someone who uses a special device and gives you some herbal supplements a professional? I mean, I think that's, maybe not for us to say. But that said, we looked to this and struggled a bit as to what to call these types of businesses that clearly were interested in the downtown area. They were not interested in Alamo Pintado area where it is zoned medical office. They wanted to be downtown. So that sort of drove this larger conversation, not only with us, but with part of some of the business community members about where we want to go with this. Where have we gone, and what kind of changes do we want to see? As part of that, I reached out to the planning community via a listserv that I belong to, sort of a statewide deal. You can submit questions and see what you get back in terms of responses. I didn't get a lot initially, but in hindsight, I think there are other communities that I would consider approaching on a one-to-one basis to see what they do about, first of all, about this particular use, but secondly, and a larger question is, what do they do in terms of perhaps limiting some of these uses to a second floor? One of staff's concerns, one of my personal concerns, is that if you're talking about a tourist-related commercial district, you really are talking about foot traffic and saving, when you can, some of that space, whether it be retail, restaurant, or whatever, to encourage that kind of experience. That flow where people are walking around town, they're drifting in and out, they're looking at art galleries, they're looking for a bite to eat, they're looking for something other than a one-on-one experience, I would say. Now, if you start looking at second floor spaces to rent, then I think that is an appropriate use for accountants, for one-on-one experiences. If it's of a therapeutic nature, consultative nature, maybe it's an accountant, maybe it's a dentist, maybe it's, it could be a number of things. But I did find that there was a planner who shared with me some of their restrictions. I guess you wouldn't call it restrictions. I'd call it an overlay in the downtown Sacramento area, where they have decided to limit a small number of designated streets to what they call a retail requirement. This is not retail entirely. This is 50 to 75% of retail, and it is strictly for the street level buildings that abut the public street. That means if you walk along, and here's the Capitol Corridor. If you walk along these streets, there are internal areas where maybe an accountant or a dentist or a psychologist could certainly have an office too. But they have decided to preserve the street-facing areas that abut major streets for pedestrian-focused activities. It was just an idea. Sacramento's a different kind of place from Solvang, but it did occur to me that perhaps this is something we want to take a look at for a limited number of streets in the downtown area, not necessarily the entire TRC by any means. Maybe just a couple of major streets where we would restrict some of the one-on-one uses, the consultative uses, to the second floors where it's possible. So this is where we're at in this discussion as far as I'm concerned. I'm certainly looking for this to be an open discussion. I know we have some members of the public here. Chamber of Commerce that would like to express some opinions about this. We're just at the initial stages of this. We also have some money for an updated design guidelines that's been set aside for several years now. And our community design element of our general plan is from 1988. It may be time to roll in this larger discussion. Maybe we want to talk about an overlay with just only a couple of streets identified that would make this the permitted use. But that's left to a larger discussion, a larger public discussion, a public process, and hopefully a skilled consultant that could help us bring that topic to the general public, to the electeds, and we can see if there's something if anything, we want to change with the current TRC designation. So we could just simply add therapy, for instance, just call it therapy, and add that as a use to the TRC as in the permitted uses section. You're allowed to, as Planning Commission, to start that conversation, and to eventually that would land in our zoning ordinance after we go through the process with council. We could add that to a permitted uses section within a particular designated area, like I mentioned, the Sacramento map model, where there's several areas of the city that might be more appropriate. Or we could restrict it to a second floor use. I'm not saying that the people who currently have businesses on the first floor would be kicked out or not allowed to renew their business license or anything like that. They would be grandfathered in. But maybe in certain areas of the TRC, we could have that as in the second floor. So that's where I'm at now in this issue in terms of my consideration. I know there's some folks that would like to share some opinions, and I'm open to some direction from Planning Commission. Thank you.
Thank you, Holly. At this point, would the commissioners like to ask questions of Holly about this?
Do you want us to hold our thoughts until after the public has a chance to speak?
Questions on
Okay.
I think that's.
I have one quick question.
Sure.
Was this one application that got this whole
No,
ball
there were
rolling?
there were actually several, and there is one. There's one pending, and I've actually asked them to hold off just a little bit until we have this conversation. They've sort of been on again, off again, talking to the city about this too. So there were several applications all at once, and it was interesting to me because maybe that reflects a change in how one is going to use the asset, the bricks and mortar asset that we have to designate in town. It could be that retail is it's just not is struggling a little bit. I think that's pretty well known. That said, I feel that staff and the city needs to take a good look at before certain uses would be encouraged on our main streets.
What did you just mean when you said retail business are struggling? Which?
Well, I think in general and nationwide. Nationwide.
Oh,
I think,
brick and mortar. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think
get it.
nationwide. I certainly don't mean necessarily. I mean, I think there are people who would argue that we see that here too. But that said, we're still pretty healthy compared to lots of towns that I've visited. So, and that is the tourist. That's our tourist focus. That's our tourist related experience, in my opinion. That said, there's a lot of turnover. Business, it's tough to make a living in restaurant businesses and retail businesses. So this is part of where I feel like our conversation needs to at least start. So.
Okay. Any other commissioners have questions? Okay. At this point, we will open this up to public hearing on the items. If anybody in the public would like to address or ask questions, you can approach the dais. Suggestions? State your name.
Fairly informal. My name's Steve Battaglia. I'm with Battaglia Commercial Real Estate. I do commercial leasing in Solvang as well as other areas in the San Ynez Valley. I have several buildings that are two-story. I have others that are single-story, but I think my general thoughts are I like the suggestions brought forward by Holly that you can allow some flexibility in either second story or off the street frontage to additional uses, which would certainly help. I would say other businesses come to the downtown, give property owners again flexibility in what businesses they can attract while still preserving, like she said, the pedestrian nature of a lot of our downtown streets, where it is pedestrian serving that is truly more of the tourist related businesses. So I like some of those thoughts, and I would look forward to seeing those explored further. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. State your name.
Tracy Beard with Solvang Chamber of Commerce, Executive Director.
Thanks, Tracy.
I'm here to talk about the TRCs, and I think I'm probably one of the people that brought this forward with Holly. I would like to see Rate A centers. Business is changing. Business has changed over the last 30 years since 1988. We would like to see Rate A centers. We would like to see healing centers, a business hub, salt bars, massage salt bars. These are all legal, proper organizations that do massage, that do what people go to vacation to do in Monterey, that go to SLO to do. We need to look at what we are serving and who we are serving. We need to open our spas up in a different way, and we're not talking massage parlors at all. We're talking how do we do business in another way. We have business right now in my building that actually would be considered illegal. Music center, someone that gives music lessons, someone that gives song lessons, somebody that gives our jazz program. My office, we have a private billing office. We have a person that just has an office there but never comes. We have some very interesting businesses in our complex. And they're all not
Frederick Square?
in Frederick's Court, and they're not all part of the TRCs, including the chamber, because we don't fall under the same category. We're a business-to-business organization. We support business, is what our job is, and to make business happen. And our job here is to look at our TRCs, how they fall, especially in our second-story units. And that I really have to say that, especially in the second-story units. These are businesses that our landlords, our owners cannot typically rent. They're harder spaces, and we need to look at them for our community and keeping that traffic down here when you take your child to possibly counseling, that you're able to go shopping right after. I think that would increase. That is our main focus of this, is to look at how SLO does business on their main street, to look at how we do business in the future here, and what business we're able to bring. Because there's some businesses that would like to come here, computer businesses that are not able to right now, that we've been looking at and we've been kind of courting. So that's all I have to say right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy. Would anybody else like to discuss? Come on up. State your name.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Statham, and I actually came here to talk about the Verizon thing.
Next time.
But I live in the TRZ zone, and so I just thought, well, I'd just say, I don't even know if I can say this, or discuss stuff that I go through living in the TRC zone. I live, you don't have a map up there, but I live right here. And across the street from me, you have some action going now where you have a weightlifting place and then also another, that's kind of the guys' place. There are some women who go there, but it's a very macho place with a lot of machismo driving up to the place with up to the business with the music blaring to have a good time. And it took me a while to like these guys because they've impacted my living over, I think it's 3 years now. I have to listen to radio or sometimes really offensive stuff that I've had to point out to them. And then you have next to them a women's weightlifting place, which was great until now. They're beginning to, they're starting to have, they're going outside of their building and running around you know, it's okay, but they've got high voices and they're running right around my house, back and forth, over and over. And so for me, here's my 2 cents for the TRC. So I don't know why I got up here, but just to say, you know, take a look at what you're introducing. If you're introducing new businesses, the impact that it may have on other businesses and the residents who are grandfathered in, who are in the TRZ zone, who have to a lot of times eat it. There's, you know, for me to just find a parking space is, you know, a daily struggle if I leave. So, but I can see that for me, it would be interesting to have other businesses on the second floor, kind of like what this other gal was saying, that had something for the local people to go to. I'm kind of a, you know, I shop at New Frontiers. I'm kind of a natural person, and so things that have to do with healing or alternative things would be interesting for me. Anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, at this point, we will close the public hearing. Commissioners, questions of staff, comments?
Want to start, Jack?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, well, I do think we need more flexibility in how we define our permitted uses in the TRC. I think, well, I was looking at the strategic plan, the Economic Development Strategic Plan for the city that I think was published in 2011. Is that right?
I think so.
And the first initiative is to strengthen and expand diversity and opportunity in Solvang's retail and service economy. And the goal is to do that to increase demand for underutilized retail and commercial space. And I think what we have is underutilized. There's quite a few vacancies, and you know, businesses come and go. And as a tourist, I would find that kind of depressing to walk around and see all those empty storefronts. So I'd like to find some other things, and I know the chamber is really trying very hard to get more new business into town, but I think we have a little too many restrictions on what we put in the downtown area. And I think we can solve some of that by changing our definitions. For example, on professional offices, we could look at things like professional is anybody who has a professional license to provide a professional service. There's all kinds of licenses like that that could qualify as a professional who could have an office in the downtown area. And I think it would be nice to have more services and shopping available for the residents of Solvang as well in the downtown area. As far as some of the kinds of Reiki, which I don't even know what that is, but some of the things that Tracy brought up, I don't see why we couldn't define those things as physical therapy or just therapy to allow them, and just keep the, you know, the real massage parlors out of town like we currently do with our municipal code. So those are some of the things we can look at. And in terms of where we allow these businesses to be, I know Aaron brought up a concern about being careful that we don't just restrict those things to second stories, because we could still end up with a lot of empty vacancies on the street front. So, but certainly that's a consideration. And we have a lot of courtyards, interior courtyards, that we could have other types of businesses inside there. The tourists don't always go in. So, I mean, Frederick's Court has restaurant in there and so forth. It's probably bringing a lot more traffic in lately, and that's great. But from all the years that I didn't live in Solvang and I used to stay here, it was also hard to find things to do in the evening. So, you know, trying to encourage more kinds of restaurants and after hours kinds of things, I think we need to do as well. So that's it for now.
Very
Thank
good.
you.
Well, I will just interject here at this point too. I realized that, first of all, I did a disservice by not mentioning spas, health clubs, and gyms. We looked at one applicant and recommended actually that she was so close to being a spa that she should call herself a spa. And that, you know, that I got a little pushback from some of my staff saying, well, you've just opened a real can now of worms. But the reality was that I felt that I could certainly make the case for that use. The other, so maybe a looser term like therapy, maybe opening up the definition of professional office to include some sort of certification. Some of these folks don't, you know, they don't have medical degrees, but they have a clientele like a
License,
spa
certificate,
or
yeah.
a beauty salon, you know, a salon, or somebody who they have people that rely on them in a regular way and come on a one-on-one basis to receive whatever they feel is of value. The other definition that isn't in here but could be in here is coaching. Coaching can be teaching. Coaching can be therapy. Coaching can be all kinds of things.
Well, we could also
So.
say lessons. We don't have
Or lessons.
We
Or
don't
you could
have
be
museums, and
coaching
we don't
for-
specifically have art galleries in here either.
No,
which are
no,
good
you
things to add.
no, you
There's
don't
a lot of
really.
things we could
So,
add.
Kate's still here?
Yes, Kincaid's still here.
We have an art gallery.
Yeah, and well, we have art galleries.
Oh, we
That's
have
my
art
point.
galleries. We have
We
quite a
don't have
few,
them as
actually.
permitted uses specifically in the code, so those need to be added for sure. And by the way, I meant to suggest to use spa as the terminology
Sorry?
for what Tracy brought up as well.
Right.
Well,
Everything's a spa.
there are a lot of spa services, and they don't all include massage. So
Yeah, well,
there
maybe
you
we
go.
need a definition somewhere of spa. I mean, I think that Roy and I had a conversation about definitions and how they can be, you know, how they sort of cut both ways. Sometimes they can be overly restrictive, and they age, you know, after a while. You know, you're not looking for too many bottling plants in town or whatever. I mean, it just isn't, you know, or blacksmiths. So.
Yeah, I mean, it kind of takes us, someone to come and bring it to our attention of how outdated and, in my mind, how ridiculous our code is. And so I'm not blaming current staff. I'm not even blaming current planning commission or anybody, because I've been on the planning commission a long time. I think it's absurd that we don't allow more uses within our TRC. That's my blunt statement. Nowhere can you, I look at permitted uses and G says business, comma, professional and trade schools. It doesn't say attorneys, yet we have lots of them. Kick them out, we're going to get sued. We have insurance firms. Kick those out, we're going to get sued. We have dentists, 3 of them where I go is right here in town. We don't allow them in our TRC. My goodness, it has become, you know, when this was enacted, I couldn't tell you the years, but tourism used to be the only horse in the race. It's not. And what people come to Solvang for, in my estimation, and I've had lots of businesses and we own lots of commercial stuff, is that we're a small town in America with a Northern European heritage and architecture. And we can't control what David Rasmussen sells or what Max sells or what I sell or what Copenhagen House sells or what any of the candle shop sells. All we can do is have, what we can regulate is Northern European architecture and that's our heritage, but we're certainly not, and some of my friends will take issue with me, and I'm Danish and been around a long time, but we're not a Northern European town any longer. Elsa Marie, my wife, is 51. She's the youngest Danish person in town, I believe. So, I mean, we don't have the immigration that we had. We don't have what we've had in decades past. What we are is a small town in America with some Northern European architecture. And we absolutely need therapy in town, and we need our doctors, and we need our dentists, we need our insurance salesmen, and we allow banks, our financial institutions, such as banks and savings and loans, but then we don't talk about general businesses. We talk about it's all under financial institution, which seems silly in retrospect. I know what we were trying to accomplish, I guess, maybe 20, 30 years ago or 40 years ago, and we've certainly are not there now, and I wouldn't even push to be there. It doesn't work. There was a push maybe 10 years ago or 15 years ago to take the TRC and make it smaller so that you just had this area, kind of what Sacramento did. Let's do it here. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, I would rather see it not be smaller. I'd rather see the TRC of what it is and just more uses. Because then you get into how come across the street, how come next door, how come, where do we draw the lines? That would take us probably 15 years to draw those lines as to who gets, who's out of the TRC and who isn't. It would be much easier and much proactive, more proactive to come up with better definitions. The therapy definition is perfect. I don't know if we say licensed by the state of California, licensed by a licensing authority. Maybe we're putting too many restrictions on that to say you got to be licensed by what, a professional organization of trainers or of life coaches. It just seems the more restrictive, the worse for me. That's how I feel, and yet I'm in really heavily tourist-related commercial businesses, me and my family. I just think that we need to be a little bit more open as to what reality is in today's world, because we don't currently allow counselors or dentists or insurance or realtors in our TRC, and yet they are abundant. And we have a radio station. We have, the church is supposed to be under a conditional use permit, but we have many, many, many businesses in town that do not meet the strict definition of our TRC. And I think we've just looked a blind eye, and I feel sorry for the folks that applied and got caught. No fault of staff. Staff's trying to do their job, and it's bringing it to our attention, and we need some immediate look and immediate help in our TRC. And I'm not being harsh to the gal who I believe probably lives on Oak Street across from this gymnasium over here. I'm thinking, because it's the only other gym that I know in town other than Rob Rosenberry, which is physical therapy, which is not here listed. And Rob's been there for a long time, and he's one of the biggest and best in the Tri-County area. He has a gym, but physical therapy also. Is that in the TRC, and don't take this as flippant at all, but there's going to be a lot more noise living in the TRC, obviously in a commercial zone, because you're in a residential house, I assume, or apartment next to a gym. But we ought to take what this gal said to heart, and maybe as we have amusement, ought to be, A, says amusement enterprises, if conducted wholly inside. Perhaps when we come to gyms and spas and health clubs, it ought to be all conducted wholly inside. That's an easy fix on some of those things, permitted uses that we have. So, with the door closed. So we will be, we couldn't be smarter about that. Like indoor music, you can only have outdoor music at restaurants at certain times. But then a door is open, and how much loud music can you have and run around? So we can certainly tighten up some of the things while still allowing uses in town, which are going on, unless we want to grandfather everybody in and say they've all violated the law for the last 10 years, 3 years, 1 year. I mean, I believe the BAR probably approved Lana Clark, who's one of the finest attorneys I know, her sign probably within 2 years ago. I don't know where it's permitted. So I don't know if we want to go through and grandfather, or we want to subject ourselves to lawsuits when we start kicking people out, or we just need to say, gosh, we need to get a handle on it and come up with a better definition across the board on what we allow. That's my feeling. And I don't know if we have some immediate issue that we could come up with. I mean, if I could make a motion tonight to say allow therapy in the TRC immediately to appease a couple or two or three of these folks that are trying to open a business here in town and came here looking next door at their neighbors saying they're doing it and they're doing it and they're doing it, and why am I not? I would sure make that motion unless it's not agendized to where that can be done. I just don't want to keep kicking it down the road and we're sitting in February, March with another workshop trying to come up with it. I'd rather get on it because I don't think we're that far off. We just need to tweak it with a few more workshops and get on with it. That's my feeling.
Yes.
I was looking at Roy. Those are many interesting ideas, all in a row. I would defer to Roy as to the best and highest use of staff energy and time at this point. I do sympathize with some of the applicants who have been asking the question about why not me, since there's all these others. I'm wondering about about the action of drafting a change to the zoning ordinance, which you are allowed to do under Section M here. Any other light commercial uses which the Planning Commission finds is of similar character to those enumerated in this section. So you could indeed request the staff come back and with some language. It may be that for the time being, some of these uses may be limited to second floor locations until we can figure out whether or not that seems to be unnecessarily restrictive. Or we could say that they would need to be in courtyards or second story locations. But that's just a thought. You know, we're having a conversation now and probably not following the protocol of the back and forth. And I will defer to Roy at the end of this as to what makes most sense after we receive your input and what you would like staff to come back with. So.
Can I ask a question? It looks like medical office uses and that sort of thing is probably allowed with as a conditional use right now.
Yes.
Was that considered for this particular situation where?
No. A lot of these folks, we're not of the.
It's 7.
They were concerned, I think, about the process and not being ultimately approved. So it is about, I think it's about $2,800. I'm not sure. Conditional use permit.
Well, where I was going with that is if we were willing to allow it as a conditional use, maybe we could move it into a permitted use more easily.
The problem with 9, which you look under the conditional use permit, it talks about medical office use, provided such use are located near a border of this district. And if we're just taking, I'm not trying to pigeonhole Frederick's Court, that is not in a border.
Near the border.
Once again, you're splitting it. You're getting into that terminology.
And I certainly don't want to legislate for one particular person or
I
use.
understand.
But it's kind of funny because under conditional uses, we allow small animal hospitals, not near the border, just small animal hospitals, but not a medical office.
Right on Copenhagen.
It's just insane. I mean, we've
know.
sat on this and haven't looked at it in a long time.
I agree. And the border language does restrict them a bit. I think we looked at that too. We were looking at it in lots of creative ways. So.
But don't we also have the issue of where the village area is versus the DRC to resolve?
We do.
Yeah.
It's on my goals for 2018.
Well, maybe we should do this at the same time.
Oh my, perhaps. But I understand. I mean, I'm also sympathetic to the desire to come away with at least some instruction as to action for the near future too. So.
My turn? Random thoughts in no order, but it's funny what Aaron said about the Danish community and the Northern European. I'm the vice president and secretary for the Danish Brotherhood, and I'm not Danish. And our president, Rick Inneman, is not Danish, but he's married to a Dane. I work for a Dane, so yeah, the demographics are definitely changing. You actually have to go into one of the courtyards to see that there are empty businesses, though, because people just don't go into courtyards. And it's the first thing, I've only been here 12 years. I was a vendor here for 10 years prior, but Frederick's Court was the first thing I noticed, like, people just don't walk in courtyards. And the one across from Shelby is one of the quietest. That I'm sure that was originally built as a retail space for tourist type things. Tourists just don't walk into courtyards. They want street front. And I love the fact that my son was a lead trumpet player for the jazz band that was upstairs in Frederick's Court for 5 years. And that's the great kind of business to have up there. I don't like to see any empty businesses in Solvang, so I think whatever we can do to increase that makes a whole lot of sense from a tax standpoint and from services for the residents. And I keep trying to think what the downside of this would be. Is this a can of worms that some other businesses are going to come that we're not going to be happy with? Is there a downside to this?
Well, yeah, there's always a downside.
Okay.
Because the broader you make the definition, then the more types of businesses that you don't know you didn't want until after they're there can come in. And I'll give the example is when I first got here in 1998, there was no ordinance on the books restricting where adult, and then we called them adult bookstores, could go. So at that time, that would be retail. You could have had adult bookstores all down Copenhagen.
Next to a toy store.
Yeah, and I don't think that's the kind of use you wanted. So I mean, it's kind of a gross example, but it's a real world example because there have been cities who had the uses come in. Grover Beach, for instance, had a use come in before they had an ordinance in place, and that business is still in the same place that they didn't want it in the first place. So those things can happen. Other than that, the only thing to worry about is not it's kind of funny. You don't want to fix what's not broken. I mean, the decisions made many years ago helped create the economic engine that you have. The reality is times have changed, so you do need to take a look at it again. But I think you want to look forward in the same way based on today's reality so that you come up with definitions that encourage things in general you think you want to encourage and don't things that you don't think you want to encourage. I know that's vague, but that's really what you got to do. You got to recognize that looking at the ordinances today and knowing that they no longer work isn't a criticism of them being put in place in the first place. They worked. Some of the reasons the economic engine works you probably wouldn't want to change. And this isn't legal, this is just observational because I'm a tourist too. And that is that Solvang has been willing to stick to their sign codes. Yes, they've reviewed them from time to time, but in general, Solvang has always been willing to enforce their sign codes, enforce their architectural rules to keep those things going. So you don't want to just open up Wild West or you'll be where I'm from, which is Atascadero, and they've tried to solve their way out of vacancies by letting anything happen in what could have been a downtown, and they still don't have a downtown. But they also never enforce those other types of rules. So yeah, it'll be interesting. So tonight, I think we can't do a new ordinance. We can't issue a permit, but you can give your staff direction, which I think we've already heard that you're interested in a quick short-term fix on one particular type of issue while you go through the more lengthy review of the whole thing so you can do this more long-term planning on how do we make this set of codes work.
Yeah.
Or let me ask you a legal question. If some attorney came in or an insurance company came in and tried to open up right now, and we said no,
Well,
I mean,
we allow professional uses.
Yeah, I guess,
so
I
those-
guess I would disagree
I think-
with that, too.
Yeah, we do, the code does say professional.
It says business, comma, professional, and trade schools.
Yeah, and trade.
So who's a
So
business?
let me see that code then.
Number G, right?
At the same time, Steve, you would know what the vacancy rate is for commercial property here in Solvang, roughly.
So under G,
I don't know that I have a rate, a specific
Or-
rate in mind.
Oh, I see.
you see business,
But there's a lot.
No, I think you're probably right on G.
Yeah.
That
Especially second floor, like you said, courtyard.
it didn't say businesses, professional businesses, and trade schools as if it was three different things.
correct. And so it's just badly worded.
Yes.
And again, no fault to anyone, but
Right.
probably
And but I-
myself, because I've been on the planning commission longer than anybody, and we haven't ever looked at this
I'll bet it's been interpreted in the past.
as any business,
Ye-
any professional,
Yes,
or a trade school.
right.
So that
Right.
means any
Yes.
business could go in if you have a business license, which is,
Right. That-
which is
That's
all
what you call
bets are off.
unintended consequences,
Correct.
which
And-
is really our mantra. We try to avoid those when possible.
Yeah,
Not always
We do
possible.
have golf courses in there, so that,
we're pretty specific on some things.
And nurseries.
And I'm not arguing for this because we have vacancies, because I think the town is really full. I mean,
It's busy.
really full.
good.
I mean, occupancy is good. Steve knows you got a few second-story buildings that have trouble, but they fill them with professional and business offices, loan offices, and student advising and counseling and things like that. And so it just happens, therapies and things of that nature. So I mean, we've kind of evolved along pretty good. I think what it brought to our attention is these one or two therapies that applied, and we had no pigeonhole to put them into.
Right.
And do we call them a professional? Do we call them a business? What do we call them? Medical? I mean,
Or except to stretch and call them a spa.
Or a spa.
And I was,
Everything's a
you know,
spa
I was,
now.
I was disciplined a little bit for that. But
or they sell retail lotions and potions out in front,
And
and
they're
then in the
retail.
back, then they're okay. Now they're retail. I mean, that seems a silly way for us to do it, and I think rightfully so. Staff said, "Time out. We got to look at this."
Yeah,
You
and
had-
that, yeah,
you
we
had-
want to be consistent. We want to make sure that the property owners and business applicants have a pretty clear understanding.
Yeah, the worst
of
thing
where
is
to go
the
forward.
unknown, is not knowing when you're a property owner or a realtor or a tenant, can I do this or not do this? And staff, I throw staff in there as the fourth. When they don't know how to interpret it, it's tough on everybody.
Okay, my last, I'll just finish up. Actually, that's all I had, other than, I wanted the name of the marriage counselor. I saw that up there. I'll talk to you afterwards. Maybe we could put like a dentist next to the Caramel Apple store, an attorney next to
Grouping.
a bar.
Grouping by consequences.
Yeah, we could group them. So that's all I have, but
It's
I'm
a holistic approach to zoning.
I'm all
We're all
for,
about the whole person, the whole person.
you'd have liked it when the card parlor moved into, next to my office.
the best restaurant in California is in Atascadero. I pointed that out to our Danish exchange students. It's the best restaurant anywhere. I wish we had one here. Wiener Schnitzel?
They do have a Wiener
Right
Schnitzel
there on the
yeah.
freeway.
Yeah.
Gosh,
I was puzzling.
it's expensive too. All right, Jack?
I think we need to be careful about defining too narrowly what we're doing, like therapy. I mean, we're talking about, well, let's define therapy so this business can get in. That's just going to lead us down this road where somebody else is going to come in with some other unknown thing, and, well, do we define another little category just so that business could get in? I think we need to look a little more broadly at what we want to make these categories and define what goes into those categories. And maybe we can redefine some of these categories we already have to include some of these newer, modern things that are showing up on our doorstep. I think we need to do something to allow them in.
But
But
we're
I
not-
think defining each one like we're talking about individually is not the way to go.
Too dated, in other words, dates too quickly, too narrow.
Yeah,
I mean, nothing
5
like
years,
a.
10 years from now, they're going to go out of fashion, and something else is going to come in, and then we're going to have to define that all over again.
One thing that we might do is just take a look at the subpart G and consider what would happen if we fixed it.
And that's what the purpose of this meeting is.
As
to-
business offices, I mean,
Yeah.
I know.
We want to spend some time thinking about exactly what would be the consequences of just saying a business can go in, because that's very broad. So you could say any business that's not otherwise prohibited
That's
by
going to
another
the other
section of the code.
extreme.
I understand, but that's what I'm saying. We might just be able to take a look at that. That's if we don't, if the collective decision is that we don't really want to spend a lot of time exploring the second story versus first story versus courtyard. I mean, that's a decision you have to make first, because if you want to do that, that's going to take some time. But holding that aside, if we just wanted to expand the number of the types of uses that could come in as a matter of right, we would give some thought to what M says, which is obviously they intended to allow other light commercial uses as long as it didn't really interfere with what's going on. But we can come up with a definition of those that wouldn't require basically a conditional use permit or whatever the permit application they're required to do, so that they would have those as a matter of right from staff as opposed to coming to the planning commission. Because right now, anybody could make application under M. Yeah, I'm not sure which, but they gotta make a particular.
Yeah, the planning commission needs to make a finding, right? Or they need to make a like-use finding.
Yeah.
That seems like it would allow, that would require an application on the part of.
It requires an application and a site plan,
Yeah.
and they have to submit all the same information as would be required for a land use permit, as specified in some reference code sections. So it may not technically be a conditional use
It's not a
permit,
conditional use permit,
but
minor or
it's
major.
kind of similar, and they would be bearing expense
Mhm.
as opposed to coming
A
down
by
and
right.
paying for their business license.
Right. So if it's not enumerated, M would cover it with
Yes.
a streamlined application process that it's not a conditional use permit. My understanding is, you get a minor and a major, and you put conditions on it, and it has to renew in a term of time. If those conditions aren't met, you constantly review them. With this would not be. This would be, we find that you're in adherence or in accordance with the law. We have made those findings, bring us in a site and tell us that the things of noise, odor, dust, vibration, smoke, hazard to life and property is not going to be interfering with your neighbor. Well, certainly a therapy or a counselor who's not permitted anywhere else, or an attorney, or would be fine. Although
we
you
might
have
be the bad
there's some
example.
odor. There's
Yeah,
some
it might be
odor
noisy or
with us
odorous.
lawyers, yeah.
So I guess my question about that is that of course that would work best with a streamlined process. There really is none in place right now, and there's no fee associated with this. So it would take a little time to just drop back and create that process. Does it have a public hearing notice or not? If it's an item before planning commission and they need to make a determination, is it publicly noticed? And
Yeah.
I don't, first of all, we're a charter city, so we wouldn't, unless there's a state law that specifically applies to charter cities that requires a public hearing notice, we wouldn't have to. I can't think of one that would apply. So politically, it might not be feasible to avoid public hearing notices, but I don't know that it would be, I'm pretty sure it would not be mandated by state law.
And maybe I missed that, Dave, but where do pot shops fit into all this?
That'll
Well-
be coming in front of you later. We're currently, right now, we have a moratorium in place that'll last another year, so
Okay.
they can't locate anywhere in town.
Okay, good.
But yes, that's one of the enjoyable things you'll get to address, is all the various iterations from growing to industrial to retail, where you might want them to be located or not.
What a mess.
It is a mess.
Yeah.
It's part of the lawyer's.
And we don't know what our friends to the west or the east of us are going to do on that either at this point.
No,
And there's nothing we can do about it anyway.
correct.
Okay.
Don't even know what Sacramento's gonna do.
They keep postponing.
So there could be a
Yeah,
way
but-
to take M and make an application process.
Yes.
It's less than a conditional use permit. It's a permitted use if we find that it is compatible with and along the
Right, and I
similar
think that
lines.
was the intent of M. It would be interesting to see if that was ever actually acted upon. I mean, it must have at some point. There
Or
may
it might
been
have
some-
just jumped to minor conditionals, or just,
yeah, and I would have to look at the fee schedule to see what would line up most.
Mr. Fleischman's been working here for the same 19 years I've been working here and handled the planning commission all that time.
True.
So I can say I don't remember one, but if it didn't create a controversy, it wouldn't have bubbled up to the city council. So you can check your records, we'll check. I'd be surprised, though, if it's ever been used. Because that would have been more helpful if your staff, if this application had come in, or if this person had come in, and your staff had been able to go find a record of how somebody had treated
A like use.
a like
finding.
use. There
Yeah.
would have been staff report, planning commission
Yep.
decision, et
Away you
cetera.
go.
And then she'd have had something consistent to go on, to deal with.
And it may serve as a screening mechanism too, for to analyze the degree of seriousness that you can apply. Anybody can apply for a business certificate, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you can run a business. And not to say that that's our job to do, but we do feel a certain sense of responsibility when people come with their dreams on their sleeves and they want to open a business and they really don't, they don't really have any idea of what that may entail. So this may be a good way to let them know, in a public way, what they need to consider.
and M might be the changing of M, or coming up with a streamlined application process for $150 or something that's reasonable of staff time and coming to us, can be a short-term alleviation, because the conditional use, minor or major, is huge
It is.
cost.
It is.
And then we should also continue to look at these things where it just says business, professional, and trade schools, and do we really mean just schools, or did we mean businesses, and ferret out. I don't mean to throw it out. We need to just fine-tune some of the things. We're very specific about nurseries, and we're not specific about accountants. I mean, it doesn't make sense.
I understand.
Yeah.
Yes. Right.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think for a lot of determinations, if there were people who applied for business licenses who were attorneys, for instance, I would have said that they would have fallen under F, where they are a professional office, and sort of end of story there.
Right.
But
I'd
that was my
say the same thing.
that's just my reading of that, and
and
another planner might
like,
come up with another interpretation. So-
Tracy, with the chamber, to me, that's administrative. That's
Yes,
an administrative
exactly.
office.
That's what I would
pretty
say, too.
Clearly an administrative
Right.
office.
But it's all under F, entitled financial institutions such as, and it's the silliest wording, financial institutions.
So clean it
and
up.
a comma, and just list
Right.
all those, not
Right.
such as, because Tracy's not a such as financial
Right.
institution, either is Jack Collison. You know what I
Right.
mean? So it's just some fine tuning.
That said, I'm all in favor of fine tuning, and that hopefully will take care of some of the ambiguity and perhaps also but not to lose sight of the larger unintended consequences, and when the larger discussion about saving some of our our frontage for particular uses I think is a far-sighted thing to do at this point,
I was going to
and
bring that up,
limit it.
that when a business comes in like this, it might be apropos to ask them what their intent is. Are they there to serve as a tourist attraction? Are they looking primarily for tourists, or are they there to serve the community at large? And that might help you guide them to a second floor or into a closed area as opposed to a storefront on a main street.
Yes, it always helps. Ultimately, if there's something to back that decision, that way, you know, the idea that your decision might be considered arbitrary or, you know, not in keeping with something that's backed by a certain designation that's called out, either, you know, in your zoning ordinance or on your zoning map. You know, that's the heavier lifting that will need to be done in the next year. And I think it's time. I mean, 1988 was a while ago. It's all worked very well, but most of general plan elements, you know, that's a seriously aged general plan element. And again, worthy of a public discussion, guided by a fairly skilled facilitator, to include lots of, you know, opinions and voices on what should, if anything, be done to update that.
Yeah, I think it wouldn't take much. I really don't, given what we have under the business professional and those things in the offices. You look under retail, how we list examples under this whole paragraph under B of retail. I mean, we list actually ice cream shops and furniture and department stores, sporting goods stores, pet shops, flower shops. I mean, we list them and then we say, and the like. Well, under businesses, it ought to say that, and the like, which would also, again, allow an attorney and an insurance and a real estate firm to be there somehow and not violate the law or the spirit of the law.
At this point, before we discuss any further, I want to actually reopen this to public comment. And did you want to come up and say something?
Yes.
Okay. We're reopening to public comment.
Please realize that most of these businesses are small businesses, and a conditional use permit would cost them much more money than the $31 permit. And most of these are very small businesses. We need to realize how business has changed. That is the first thing, and maybe have that discussion for next month. But I do think to make sure, I don't have all your laws in front of me. I have enough information, but I don't have everything you're talking about.
That's a good point.
To go back. So I would like that truly looked at, or maybe a community discussion, and I would like to be involved in that.
Got it. Okay, we'll keep. We're open. Let's come on up, Steve.
I just wanted to address a couple things. One, you asked of unintended consequences, and that would be my one concern with trying to open up the one section, I think, M. If you make it too broad, then you can get unintended businesses going in your downtown core street frontage. I mean, I don't think that's the city's job to tell people where they can and can't go unless it's in the framework. My job, I can steer them, you know, and say, hey, that's better up in the second floor, you know, rather than the downstairs. But I think from a city, everybody looks for consistency, like you said. And so that would be my one concern, and that's why in my original comments, I kind of like the idea of either an overlay or something like Sacramento, where it preserves the street frontage, keeps that a little tighter, but gives you flexibility when you move off that street. And again, that all comes back from, again, your unintended consequences. If you have a couple businesses that are not necessarily tourist serving, you've seen tourists, they'll wander to the corner of the street and they'll look, do I want to go down this next block? And that kind of says, you know, where Shelby is. They kind of go back and go, nope, nothing there for me. They'll turn around, and if we have too many of those start lining up, our core shrinks, in my opinion. And so I would just be a concern I would have, keeping that little tighter in that core to keep the tourist stuff being served there and keeping the pedestrian traffic flowing. And again, off corridor, a little bit up second floor or block off, then you can be a little more open.
Good point. Maybe we could have like what Boston has, where they have that Freedom Walk. We could have the Solvang Walk. And just follow the little signs.
Kind of already do.
That's true. What?
We do have one.
Really?
It just doesn't have any markers, but.
I have to get out more often.
Can I just ask one question?
Come on up, and then we'll close it to public comment.
Okay, I don't have a list of what you guys are looking at, the
It's online, and I'll be happy to
Okay.
provide it to you also.
but, back to the weightlifting thing. I was just wondering, is that on there?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
Jim, in the
Jim.
GRC. Yep.
It wouldn't have been permitted,
Right,
hopefully,
I know.
without that.
Club Spa Gym, it's absolutely, it's listed, which is amazing, isn't it? I know.
It is.
Yeah, dentist office is not.
And the impact of that gym is huge, as far as traffic goes too. There's so much more traffic going by there, driving fast, not stopping at stop signs. I have to call local dispatch quite often, and it's significant in the difference between what used to be. I've been there for over 20 years, from what used to be and what is happening now, and the noise. And so, how would I go about, maybe I should do this somewhere else. How would I go about asking them, how would I go about getting them to close their door? Or
I would knock on their door.
I have, and I've
when
talked
they're
to the
open?
landlord. Okay, I'll come and talk to you.
Good,
Very good.
Thank
because
you.
we're getting a little bit off track.
you.
Yes,
Excellent. Okay,
thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm closing the second round of public comment. Back to staff's questions if we have any. There's nothing to vote on here tonight. More comments, ladies and gentlemen?
Just,
Again, the only direction I'd have is I'd come up with some form or some application under M that is less than a conditional use permit for the cost standpoint, if there is such a thing.
Good point.
Where it could come to staff vets it, and it comes to us while we're looking at these other uses and ferreting it out. We'll be smarter in 3 months or 4 months as we have more public input and we think about it a little bit more. In the meantime, it would sure be nice to allow some permitted uses short of going to conditional use. But I don't know if that's
Well, that's what the gist of this whole thing is.
no, I would agree with that, but I also wanted to suggest to everybody that they do take a look at this Economic Development Strategic Plan. A lot of what's in here is intended to expand the diversity and opportunity in our retail and service economy without damaging the tourist economy. So there's a lot of good ideas in here. Apparently, there were several workshops held, and it doesn't look like a whole lot's been done since, but, you know, we could deal with a lot of this at the same time and come up, I think, with some really good
Just to update you on
changes to
that
make
too, as I came on board, we were just finishing the cycle of goal setting and then realizing those or doing an assessment of where we were with the number of goals that resulted from that effort. And now with Hans Stu's exit, we await the appointment of another council member to fill that role. He was very involved in economic development. It's not to say that we could, you know, we couldn't make some progress at this point in the absence of somebody that's designated to do that. But we're hoping that happens soon, and that we can begin to initiate some of those new goals again. Some of them were realized, and actually one of them was the update of the design guidelines. That was one of the goals that was identified as part of that with part of that committee's efforts, and we got funding for it. It has not been spent yet, and we are considering moving forward at the turn of the year with that. So.
Okay. Any other questions? As far as action goes on this item on the agenda, how we want to word this?
Well, I don't think you need to take action. I think you've given us direction, and let me repeat what I think I heard, and then you can tell me if we got that right. We had a lot of discussion, but the upshot is that the commission as a whole would like us to take a look at kind of a temporary, quicker fix that allows for a process for individuals who want to open something that doesn't meet the current definitions to be able to come before the Planning Commission with an adequate staff report so you could make a determination under M. And then long-term, there's still some openness to thinking about the second story and interior But that hasn't been decided completely. But you have directed us to take a good look at it so that the definitions are more modern and workable in the foreseeable future, so that people can bring in businesses as a matter of right that are appropriate for the zone.
Jersey? Yep.
So, and what I hear you say then, Roy, is that we want to do the action under M as quickly as possible. Hopefully, recovering at least some of our costs to staff, and then the rewording of some of the language in the zoning ordinance would take a zoning ordinance text amendment.
Correct.
And that may be wrapped into a larger look at designating specific areas, which we can do with a text amendment.
Yes.
We don't necessarily have, it doesn't have to be.
And then happily, I don't, except for the potential to set a fee, I don't see council action required as such for us to address them. It's already in the code.
Okay.
So it doesn't need a text change. Everything else would be recommended from the planning commission up to the council, and then the council would have to take action.
Okay.
With respect to fees and what have you, I think Tracy makes a very good point. Most of these people that are coming in are small businesses, and if we start adding
Right, I think
huge
that was the whole
fees, we're
point of the
basically locking them out.
that was the whole point of the discussion was, and by way of example, Commissioner,
Infante?
Aaron, yeah,
Peterson.
he suggested $150.
The Danish
And I know
guy.
he was just bringing that out of the air, but I think that was the point that was being made, was conditional use permit is foreclosing people. Because no one's gonna wanna spend $5,000 to find out whether or not they're gonna get a business license.
Right.
But something more reasonable, they're willing to do, especially if after they talk to staff, they think they're gonna get a positive recommendation, but.
Yeah, and I think it's an incentive for staff to move ahead with the next and more deeply considered action, because there's staff time involved. It takes me a while to write a staff report, and that's an opportunity cost that is spent somewhere else. And I would not look forward to processing, onesie twosies for the next year in this manner, especially if we felt like there was a strong need to take care of some of these queries on business openings by changing the text, making it possible by right. So.
Okay.
Very good.
Anybody else?
Thank you.
Planning director's comments on anything else?
I don't have a thing, actually. I've just been busy listening and participating here. I must say that we're moving forward with some of our major projects in town. I mean, it's all an approval process, of course. We got an in lieu parking agreement signed by the current owner of Shelby Ranch, so we are fingers crossed, and we're hopeful that that's going to move forward soon.
With the pool on the top floor still?
No pool.
Okay.
No pool
A
this
bar on
time.
the top floor?
No bar on the top floor either. Restaurant,
Yeah.
What
24 units.
do you think is soon?
Well,
I mean, they were supposed to have started
we know.
in September,
Yes.
and before that, in
Yeah, we
July.
did.
Yeah,
Are they
you did.
ever gonna start?
We are certainly encouraging every action to be taken as soon as possible. So we're hoping towards the turn of the year that we will see that finalized in action.
How are the minutes of this meeting going to get written?
Carefully.
Anybody else?
Yes, I don't know actually, because it might be me that will have to do it.
We'll have to
Brenda's
watch
not
the
here.
video.
I'll
or-
have to watch the video.
And then take notes. Okay.
No, I think I've received direction, and that's very helpful at this point.
Okay.
So we will come back in December, and we will have a fairly full. I think I say that now, but I think we'll have a fairly full agenda in December too. We'll have
And that
Verizon
meeting-
coming back. There's a lot split. There'll be this discussion to continue, and I think that there's one other item too that I'm forgetting, but
Okay.
so
And that'll be on December 4th.
that will be on December 4th.
That's a Monday. Okay.
Yes.
Anybody else? This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.